Morning, everybody. We'll just give a couple more minutes for the people who are having a slow, leisurely Saturday morning and filtering in. Should be a good turnout of practitioners today. I think over 130 people signed up from outside of the course. So it's always nice when it feels like people are benefiting from the speakers that pass through the field. And as many of you already know, the field is where Dharma teachers and therapists can develop, share, and teach spiritual and therapeutic protocols, primarily for Western nervous systems. I think the East have a lot of that covered in a really beautiful and elegant way. And with that, I'd like to present today's speaker, Andrew Holecek, who is a scholar-practitioner, well-known writer of Dharma books, a colleague of Justin Wall, who I'd like to thank for bringing in these amazing scholar practitioners to speak to a broad audience. I think that's just so wonderful. And I don't think there's much more I need to say. Andrew he's so well known in our Dharma circles, and I'd like to pass it over to him in 1 second. One thing I would like to point out is that in the chat, I posted a link to pre-order his new book, Total Eclipse of the Mind, Unleashing the Power of Darkness for Creativity, Healing, and Transformation. So for many of you who are either in the Dark Retreat course or dabbling in Dark Retreat matters and methodologies, then this might be a really great opportunity for you to learn a bit more. And I'll let Andrew Holecek take it from here. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everybody. Lama Karma. Nice to hang with you all and also be part of this kind of pioneering, groundbreaking program with David and Michael and all the other suspects involved in dark matters. Here we are trying to bring some darkness into the world. I think that's cool. So what I want to do is, in the time that I have with you, is share some insights that I've gathered from my own experience. And actually, I was just thinking, it'll be 30 years this summer that I started studying, practicing Dark Retreat with my main teacher, Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso Rinpoche. And so I want to share with you perhaps a couple things that, boy, I wish I would have known this 30 years ago. Not in any way to dismiss the extraordinary, just capacities of traditional Bön, Kalachakra, Dzogchen teachings to prepare one for the dark. So I want to share a little bit about my experience and then also a little bit about some of the data that we're collecting. I'm doing a number of studies, actually, with different universities, different teams of neuroscientists. And we're starting to get, we've been over a year in our first study, so we're starting to collect really cool data around people going in three days, 4 nights kind of thing. So I'll share a little bit about that. And then, we'll have an opportunity for some Q&A and discussion. And it's my favorite part. This is where things really kind of come alive. But I do want to state at the outset that this is my languaging, my cartography. I relate to Dark Retreat in 2 principal forms, Sutra and Tantra. And again, my cartography, my languaging, Sutra is more exoteric in nature. It's more psychological in nature. It's more about processes of self-fulfillment. And it's psycholytic in the sense of lysis, loosening, breaking things up. And for me, this is anywhere from really just a couple hours that you can do at home. And this is the way when I'm introducing it, I'm using a highly kind of titrated drip approach that makes it very completely workable and digestible for people. Because for a lot of folks, even 3 days in the dark is just too much. It's too intimidating. So anywhere from a couple hours to 3 days is what I would consider Sutra level. And then there's the more traditional Tantric level. Where you go on for up to 49 days, more esoteric, obviously, more about spiritual processes instead of psychological. It's more about self-transcendence than self-fulfillment. And it's more psychedelic than psycholytic in the true etymological sense, where psychedelic literally translates as mind manifesting. Mind becomes reality in the dark, just like in a dream, and just like in the bardos, which is interestingly enough referred to as the dream at the end of time. Why? Well, because there's nothing else, right? In a certain way, you're forced to relate to your mind. You're forced to meditate. And this is perhaps one reason why, in some circles, dark retreat traditionally is referred to as a forceful method of liberation, because just like death, darkness, in a certain sense, is uncompromising and non-negotiable. And so I want to start perhaps by, again, installing my languaging, kind of GPS, global positioning systems that can help us orient our way in an otherwise bewildering set of dark experiences where it's easy to get lost in the dark. And so the first one, this one that was a delightful surprise to me, came together a couple of years ago, and I started studying quite concernedly the Western mystical traditions, the Western esoteric non-dual teachings, going back to the pre-Socratics, people like Parmenides and Empedocles. It's amazing. You'll find dark intimations of dark practice going back, especially to Parmenides. Peter Kingsley writes about it beautifully in his book, In the Dark Places of Wisdom. And then in the Neoplatonists, especially Iamblichus, he speaks quite elegantly about the power of exploring dark retreat. And so what really triggered this for me was looking at the work of Heraclitus. So this may warrant a little commentary. He's the famous philosopher of flow. He's the guy that said, can't step into the same river twice. Actually, you can't step into the same body into the same moment twice. Everything's always flowing. But he's also a really compelling philosopher of non-duality. And he coined this beautiful term, Enantiodromia. I just love it. It's almost lyrical. Enantiodromia, Enantiodromia. And the word literally means running into the opposite or counter running. And you'll see where I'm going with this in a second. This was a concept, a term that was picked up, what a surprise, by Carl Jung. And if there is a psychologist, if there is a psychologist that rules the dark, it would be the archetypal depth psychologist, Carl Jung. I mean, his insights around this has really, really helped me. So Jung ran with this notion when he was dealing with his archetypes of anima, animus. And I wanted to share just one rendering to show you how much explanatory power this principle has from a really interesting riff by Patrick Harper, who I really like. And then I'll tie this into Eastern principles, and then I'm going to tie it very directly into the dark, because for me, it's like when I came across this, it was like, whoa, does this really explain what's going on when you're feeling the squeeze in the dark? So this is what Harper writes. In Western culture, it sometimes seems as if our whole psychological history is a series of enantiodromia. The Enlightenment reaction against daimonic superstition and imagination, the romantic counter-reaction, the rise of philosophical materialism, and at its height, the violent about-face of spiritualism. All sudden twists in the zeitgeist, sudden surges in a nation's mood, sudden declarations of war, have their source in the reversing of the poles of a collective psyche. Even when there is no violent enantiodromia, the tension between the many and the one, soul and spirit, in both the individual and the collective psyche is always present and always seeking to maintain equilibrium, end quote. And so this is what I'm going to be talking about a little bit later, equilibrium and homeostasis, and how dark retreat is a magnificent psychospiritual technology that can actually bring about balance. And so in the East, no surprise, you'll find intimations of this in Taoism, principles of yin and yang. And there's a wonderful overarching summary statement here, if you indulge me for just one more moment, from the Tao Te Ching, the Book of Changes, again, that ties in so elegantly to the universality of this principle and its applicability to what we're doing when we venture into the dark. And so this is what it says in this classic text. The Great One produces the two poles, obviously heaven and earth, which in turn give rise to the energies of the dark, yin, and the light, yang. These two energies then transform themselves, one rising upwards and the other descending downwards. They merge again and give rise to forms. They separate and merge again. When they are separate, they merge. When they are merged, they separate. This is the never-ending course of heaven and earth. Here's the key line. Each end is followed by a beginning, each extreme, a transformation into its opposite. All things are attuned to each other. That from which all beings arise and from which they have their origins is known as the Great One. That which gives them form and perfection is the duality of darkness and light, end quote. And so here's the way this comes together for darkness, right? This Enantiodromic principle lays the foundation, the right view for dark retreat with this central message. Each end is followed by a beginning, each extreme by a transformation into its opposite. And yeah, like there's no doubt about it, right? I mean, dark retreat from the outside, this is pretty extreme. I mean, it's really out there, right? Or in our case, in there. But there is a method to its madness. And the following is that by closing everything down, and this is interesting, this is another interjection, kind of both from Hinduism and Buddhism. One of the single most important central terms in these traditions, you well know, is dharma. Etymologically, again, I'm a big fan of word origins. Dharma comes from a root, dhr, that means to hold. Hold, as in, number one, cease, stop. Dark retreat is defined by cessation, right? And hold, as in contain, mandala principle, holding environment, both of which are magnificently iterated in the practice of dark. And so when you're in the dark, right, if you've done it, you can't move around like you normally do, physically, mentally, emotionally. You can't move around in there. Every fundamental form of distraction, which literally means to pull apart, every form of distraction is taken away. And so in a certain way, you're forced to retract, you're forced to retreat simply because you can no longer distract. And so this is one of the reasons dark retreat gets challenging. It really is a reason it's the penultimate bardo yoga. It's really like dying, letting go, or letting go is just a euphemism for death. And so you're fundamentally forced, right, to let go of all our habitual ways of functioning in the world, right? So walls, I'm being slightly dramatic here for purposes of time, but maybe not too much, right? The walls close in on you. The floor closes in, the roof closes in, the past closes in, the future closes in. And you're fundamentally being squeezed from every direction into the only thing that ever truly exists, the present moment. The present moment. And actually, this is where it gets even better. Eventually, you're even squeezed out of the present moment itself. Because I'll talk about this later. Space, time, causality, all co-emerging with the sense of self. These are all constructs. And they're all fundamentally deconstructed in the dark. So fundamentally, even time is deconstructed. So you're forced into the present moment. And then eventually the present moment dissolves into what Padmasambhava talked about as the fourth moment, or what Lama Surya Das playfully coined Buddha standard time. A timeless dimension of existence, you know, where time itself just completely ceases. And so if we resist what darkness is inviting, if we don't understand the phenomenology, what's actually taking place, well, it can become an absolute nightmare in the dark if you resist. But if you surrender, it becomes completely liberating. But the idea here is, yes, so using these Enantiodromic principles, we're fundamentally retreating, withdrawing, squeezing in upon ourselves to such an extent that all these restraints flip, transform into their opposites. That's the Enantiodromia. Closing down leads to profound, infinite opening, right? Retreating flips into advancing, withdrawing transforms into expansion. And as I playfully like to say, the tomb, right? Darkness can be like a tomb, hence Bardo Yoga. The tomb then transforms into a womb. And like I said in my TED Talk, I can't resist. A womb with a view. I just can't resist. A womb with a view of who you really are, right? When you can no longer do anything. And so understanding this can be profoundly revelatory. You're in there, right? And you're being crushed, confined into the present moment, being forced to release, let go of everything, right? What did Chris Christopherson say, or right? And then Janis Joplin made famous, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. So you're going to the dark and you have to lose it all, or you're strongly invited that you lose it all. Drop it all, die to it all. And then through this kind of release, entering into the death space, then becomes an embryonic space. It becomes a place of birth in Genesis. And this is something that's worth understanding when you're in there. So when you feel the pressure, right? No pressure, no diamond. When you feel the pressure, you understand WTF is going on. Where is it coming from? And so understand this further, I think is helpful going into the phenomenology even deeper to help us understand both the promise and peril of dark retreat. And so the following is a tad bit tricky because dark retreat is so highly idiosyncratic. We've been interviewing, I've been listening to literally, I probably at this point, 400, 500 post-retreat interviews. It's amazing how different these experiences can be. And it may be cliche, but it seems to be true. You may not always get what you want, but you tend, in fact, to get what you need. And so understanding the following, again, boy, I wish somebody would have told me this, because it will help you perhaps understand why this practice is, in fact, so transformative and also so challenging. And I suppose right at the outset, I think it's important to understand that darkness isn't doing any of this, right? The darkness is neutral. This is acting fundamentally as a metaphysical mirror to help us really work with reflections at the deepest possible levels. And so in concert with this is what, boy, I wish somebody would have told me this. One of the things that darkness does is it helps you work with projection at the deepest possible levels. And so to tie this into Bardo Yoga, because especially in the Tibetan tradition, this practice is deeply related to Bardo Yoga. The 49 days of Bardo Dark Retreat is the classic duration, right? The amount of time. I don't know where they get this polling number that one spends in the Bardos. But the idea here is that using Bardo principles, especially luminous Bardo Dharmata, the mind itself, just a brief commentary on the kind of process of projection altogether, the mind itself is always radiating. It's always shining. In fact, when you go in far enough into the dark, you see this radiance, you see this shine. As the lights appear, the visions appear, the deities, the gods, the archetypes, all these things start to appear. These are the lights of the mind actually starting to radiate once the projections have been purified. And so in the luminous Bardo of Dharmata, if one cannot relate to the thermonuclear power of the mind with this blazing light, in Shambhala language, the light of the great eastern sun, well, we contract against it, we refer the experience, and then healthy radiance shine turns into pathological projection. This is a big deal because we live in a world of our projections. I mean, Carl Jung, again, nailed this. It's an astounding line. Projection turns the world into a replica of one's unknown face. This is an astounding statement. I mean, we're living in a world of our projections in a hall of mirrors we're not even aware of. And so this notion of projection goes all the way down from kind of classic psychological projection, right? And to give you a sense of the universality, the omnipresence of this, just reflect on this for just a second. See if it's true. If a situation affects you more than it informs you, you're projecting. If you react more than you respond, you're projecting. Oh my goodness, I wish you hadn't told me. Because I'm affected, I'm reacting all the effing time. And so what happens in the dark, right, is you have this amazing capacity to work with this because you literally, and this is so great, literally and metaphorically, but literally you can't project in the dark like you normally would. You can't throw shit around in the dark. If you do, you're going to get hit by your own projections, right? And so this is a marvelous, I think, blending of literal and metaphorical. You can't project in your normal ways. And so what happens here that's so amazing, and this was something, again, I wish somebody would have told me. This insight came to me maybe a decade ago. When, some of my earlier retreats, they weren't exactly a day on the beach. They were challenging, for sure. The darkness was heavy, suffocating, oppressive, right? Like I was being crushed. Well, again, the darkness isn't doing that. Darkness isn't heavy. Darkness isn't oppressive. Darkness isn't suffocating. And so what I discovered, right, is that the weight of the projections, the weight of the darkness itself that I was feeling in the dark was directly proportional to everything I had projected onto it. Right. All my hopes, my anxieties, my fears, just like we do with death, by the way. The only thing we project onto more than darkness is death. which is why we're so adversely affected by it. It's not because of death. Death is neutral. Just like darkness, we're adversely affected by it because we project the crap out of it. Or actually, we project all our crap into it. See? And that's what makes darkness and death just so challenging to work with. So you can't project them the normal way. And so what happens is when you go into the dark, you can't project, the projections come home to roost. And you feel this as the weight of the darkness. And so when you're in there using language from integral approaches, this is the process of cleaning up, owning up. You have this precious but painful opportunity to own up to all your projections because you can no longer throw them out. And so then what happens is the most amazing thing. You may discover, sometimes it happens rather quickly, sometimes it depends on the person again. You may discover that at a certain amount of time, I'll never forget this one retreat. I came in and I was like, okay, I'm going to go in because, I should go back. And I went in there and it was like, whoa, this darkness has really changed. It wasn't suffocating. It wasn't oppressive. It felt nurturing, loving. And I said, what the heck is going on, right? So the darkness, when you start to own up, and you'll feel this, you also feel this in your life, by the way, because this dark retreat is just life concentrate. You'll feel it as the darkness starts to lighten up in both senses, senses, in the sense of lightening up in terms of burdened and also lightening up. The darkness actually seems to change color. And even though if you took a photometer, there'd be no change in wavelength. But the textural quality of the darkness changes. Well, the darkness hasn't changed. You have. And you therefore have this amazing opportunity, again, with this metaphysical mirror, more powerful than the Webb telescope, right? Webb telescope, a million miles from space, peering back to within 300,000 years, allegedly, of the Big Bang, to the origin of the universe. Dark retreat's the same thing. But the mirrors are even more polished, and instead of a telescope, it's an interscope. A microscope, a microphenomenological scope where you can look to the origins of your very self within the dark. And so what I discovered, boy, so I wish I would have known this, unhealthy projection flips into healthy reflection. You have a lot of time to reflect in the dark. You have a lot of time to work with the stuff. And if you understand, right? You understand, you're feeling the weight, whatever. And again, you may not. This is what's so challenging about, is everybody going to experience this? No, not at all. I know some people, more the exception than the rule, that go in and boy, they just have a so-called terrific time right out of the gates. But for most people, it can be a little bit challenging up front. And this is what I want to try to help you with. So you understand why is it initially so potentially challenging. So this first part of dealing with projection is the big deal. So eventually what you do, this is so cool. So you start with these secondary, tertiary, quaternary projections that are more in the psychological arena. You own those up, you clean those up. Those projections are incorporated. But then you go all the way down to the reduction base of non-duality, where the fundamental ontological projection is itself purified and owned up. The fact that there's even an out there is a projection. Wheeler was on, the student of Einstein. There is no out there out there. The fact that you reify, solidify, concretize a dualistic, solid, lasting, independent, seeming external world, that is a projection. And even that is owned up in the dark. Even that is cleaned up. When that level of projection dissolves into fundamental non-duality. So this is where we're going. So this is the next part of my riff. I'm going to be going, I like this, my languaging again. Darkness is the color of non-duality. And fundamentally what happens through a succession of openings, which now I'm going to turn to, the mind drops, heals, integrates all these levels of distraction, dismemberment, fractures, duality, going all the way down to the non-dual reduction base of innate wholeness. And so that's what I want to say a little bit more about now. So this is another one that, boy, this has just been so helpful to me. So there's a wonderful framework within the Tibetan schema here. I'm not sure if Lama K has talked about this or not, or David or Michael. The term in Tibetan is Rangbap. Do you guys talk about this at all? The word literally means self-fall. And what it alludes to in relationship to the dark is the following. When you go into the dark and you open to it, and I suppose in regard, my comments are an invitation or perhaps some tips for how to open to an environment when they're introduced to it, and our studies have shown this, 90%, check out these numbers, the data that we've collected so far, 90% of the people that go into the dark have a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. In other words, what do? They contract. They contract. Not merely in self-defense, but in self-generation, because contraction is, in fact, what generates the sense of self. And so when you enter into the dark, you're kind of entering this acid bath. You're being invited and almost forced to open. And if you open, surrender, die, favorite definition of meditation, habituation to openness. I look at death now as the grand opening, right? So if you go into the dark and you surrender to it, open to it, that's where the magic takes place. If you hit the dark, and again, most people do it first, you defensively contract, well, that transforms or can transform at least the initial stages of the dark into quite a challenging experience because you're defensively contracting against an environment that's fundamentally inviting you and then forcing you to open. And so using this principle of self-fall, when the mind eventually does open and relax in the dark, it falls into itself. As Rumi put it, into wider rings of being. This, by the way, is reinstantiated in a microcosmic way every single night when we fall asleep, which is why the nocturnal meditations are magnificent preparatory practices for dark retreat and for the end of life, the dream at the end of time, when the mind is also going to fall into itself. And so you open, and here's what I've discovered, is you will fall, the mind will fall from conscious to preconscious to subconscious to unconscious to collective unconscious. Thank you, Carl Jung. And then eventually even deeper, the baton is handed off to the wisdom traditions. It falls into the super conscious, clear light mind. And as it does so, you have this incredible ability over and over. I've done this for so many years, so often, I can speak with at least some level of conviction in my own experience. You experience this kind of archaeology of consciousness as the mind falls through the sedimentation levels of both the conscious and the unconscious mind. And so you get to see the deposition of these levels, you get to see the sedimentation, and you actually get to relate to, fall through these, becoming increasingly familiar with the very definition of meditation in the Tibetan language, GOM, to become familiar with the entire vast spectrum of your identity. This is tremendously impactful, tremendously special. No, of course, any inner work will do this. Dark retreat isn't really that special. It's just a really intense, concentrated way to work with your mind and heart. It's just a really cool psychospiritual technology that allows you to do that. And so if you understand what's happening in this descent, I think traditionally, and I know David works with this, traditionally this practice is referred to as a practice of emergence. Things emerge. I think it's a completely viable way to approach it. But I think you can equally say it's a practice of submergence. But whether it's emerging or submerging, the point is the following. Right? One way or the other, things are going to come up. Anybody done this practice at all, right? One way or the other, things are going to come up. Well, let's just get real. Can I use 4-letter words? Shit's going to come up, right? This is what you're paying for. You're not paying to go in there to work on your tan. I often say this, I get such a kick, right? I want the people I'm guiding in, I really want you to have a good time. But this practice is not about having a good time. It's not New Age. Authentic path is not about feeling good, unless you're talking about basic goodness. It's about getting real. And so what you get real in the dark because you can't get away. And so you're in there. And so what happens is you're opening, and the conscious mind relaxes and falls into the unconscious mind. This is incredibly important. This is the essence of Jung's path of individuation, by the way, bringing unconscious processes into the light of consciousness. If you don't do that, your life is a symptomatic readout of the contents of your unconscious mind, just like in a dream. Check out these numbers. 95% minimum. 95% of what we do is dictated by unconscious processes. You think you have free will? No way. And so what happens? Like the applicability here is just amazing, right? What controls your dreams at night if you don't? Your unconscious mind. What controls your bardo experience, the dream at the end of time when you die? Your unconscious mind. What's controlling your life right now? Your unconscious mind. And so when you're going into the dark, the mind is opening and falling into itself. So you have this extraordinary capacity to make unconscious processes conscious. So that you can then finally relate to them instead of from them, because relating from them is no relationship at all. And so this is a great line. So this comes from Rudy Gobert, NBA superstar. I think he's still in the playoffs, plays for the Timberwolves. He's done Dark Retreat, and he came out with this great line. He came out of 3 days, 4 nights, and said this. He said, Dark Retreat is meditation times 1,000. Cool. Maybe slightly hyperbolic, but maybe not. Very interesting word. It's just a really intense way of meditating. Now, here's where it gets interesting to me, because one of my main teachers, the radical iconoclastic Siddha sage, Trungpa Rinpoche, famously said, meditation isn't a sedative. It's a laxative. Have you heard this one? It's a laxative, right? Okay, so do a little math. All right, Dark Retreat is meditation times 1,000. Meditation is a laxative. Well, what's happening when you're going into the dark? You're laxating times 1,000. All this shit's gonna come up. Purging, just like psychedelics, purging and purifying, right? So here's the Surgeon General's warning. Are you sure you guys want to do this? Like at one level, first of all, you're getting crushed, right? The Enantiodromia principle of Dark Retreat is crushing you. Oh, wait, it gets better. Now you're getting crapped. You're basically getting the shit blessed out of you. And so if you don't understand that you've entered this laxating environment, this is the psycholytic aspect, the loosening, the lysis, and all this shit's going to come up. You don't understand it. You don't receive it, welcome it, say yes to it. What are you going to do? You're going to reject it yet again. You're going to refuse it yet again. You're going to throw it back into your unconscious mind yet again. This is another reason, I'm sure Lama Kea said this, why Dark Retreat is considered an advanced form of meditation. Because it's super accelerated. It's like a hadron particle accelerator. But here, the acceleration takes place not by bringing things near to the speed of light, but by coming to a screeching halt. So you accelerate your psychospiritual development by coming to a screaming, screeching halt. Just like when you die. And which is like why the wisdom traditions say there are more opportunities for rapid psychospiritual transformation at death than in life. This is one reason. Because you're finally forced to hold. There's the Dharma again. Cease, stop. And this, I'll say more about this later. This is where all the crazy benefits come from doing absolutely nothing. Easiest thing in the world, just like death. Hardest thing in the world. So this ties in, let me just say this again, I want to try to bring this in, swing this into like Bardo principles. This ties into Bardo principles beautifully because Robert Thurman, who I have the great good fortune to work with every year, has this amazing line. He said, it's not safe to die as long as you still have an unconscious mind. What an amazing statement. Why? Because that's what's going to come up. That's what's going to control your experience. Trungpa Rinpoche again, what is it that reincarnates? What did he say? Your bad habits. And where are all those habits stored? In your unconscious mind. And so whether it's deep inner work, psychedelics, Dark Retreat, or death, or dream yoga, these unconscious processes have to be brought into the light of consciousness. So this is precisely, so here we go. Let's go back to the sedimentation thing and the falling of the mind into itself. This is precisely why the upper dimensions, the earlier dimensions of Dark Retreat can in fact be so challenging. And I have come across none of this. I'm not disparaging any of the amazing, amazing tools, teachings, technologies from the wisdom traditions, not at all. What I hope you're trying to see is I try to bring a more integral, complete East-West approach to this. What can we learn from the depth psychologists? What can we learn from processes of projection and repression and whatnot that help us understand what's happening when we're in the dark? Because for the vast majority of people, and our data is showing this, the first part is no day at the beach, unless you expand your notion of what a beach is. And so the idea here is when you first go into the dark, the mind opens and relaxes and falls into itself, you're falling into the upper bandwidths of the unconscious mind, which by languaging, this is where all the spiders and snakes hang out. This is the refuse heap of the unconscious mind. Now, this is important, right? Out of sight is not out of mind. Out of sight is into the unconscious mind. And so playing with language, what we refuse in conscious experience actually constellates into the refuse heap of this dimension of your unconscious mind. And so when you first fall into the dark, you're falling into this bed of your own making, where all this refuse is hanging out. And if you don't understand this, it actually serves really as a type of rite of passage, actually, almost initiatory. You have to be a little careful here. You can see almost like a gauntlet. And if you're not aware of what's going on here, and a lot of people, they're not prepared properly, they go in, they drop into this, within 2 hours, they're out of there. It's not a defeat, by the way. I'm not criticizing anybody for running. It could be the most intelligent thing they do. There's no way I'm going back in there. There's no way I'm doing this. But if you understand, okay, I'm facing this refuse. I'm facing this refuse bin. And if you open and relax, befriend, relate to that, understand it. No, don't fear it. What did Marie Curie, right? Double Nobel laureate in physics and chemistry, said something so beautiful that applies to anything related to fear. Nothing in life is to be feared. It's only to be understood. The more you understand, the less you fear. And so this blah, 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 and installing these GPS is so you understand what's happening as the mind falls into itself. And the Western psychological tradition has a tremendous amount to say here. So basically the mind opens, falls into itself. And then this is why, okay, this is our first intimation. Now it's not merely psycholytic, it's starting to be psychedelic. This is our first formal intimation of the deep relationship of dark retreat to psychedelics. In fact, we're not doing these studies yet, but we're in conversation with scientists, eventually going to be studying the release of endogenous DMT after about 7 to 10 days. I absolutely positively view this practice as a form of sober psychedelic. You become the medicine. You don't need an exogenous mind-altering substance. The mind has the capacity to experience all these things within itself. But the reason I tie this in here is one of the biggest issues with a dark retreat, as with psychedelics, is dosage. Getting the dosage right. Because you can overdose in dark retreat. On what? Yourself. You can overdose on yourself. So getting the dosage right requires a little bit of titration, a little bit of experimentation, right? T.S. Eliot once said so beautifully, humankind cannot bear very much reality. So when reality is laid bare in the dark because you can no longer run from it, just like in a dream, just like in the bardos, you really are forced to come face to face with all these dimensions of your conscious and unconscious mind. And so understanding this can be enormously helpful in terms of understanding, get the dosage right, overdose. When you're in, by the way, just to show you what happens in how this relates to the bardos. So I'm going to be, again, slightly exaggerating here, but not much. So let's say you're in there for a couple of days, let's say a couple hours. This is kind of cool. This is hip. Kind of goth. I can see why people are doing this, right? Stay in there for an afternoon. Not quite so cool. It's starting to heat up. I'm exaggerating. Stay in there for a day or two. Definitely not cool anymore. It's hot as an oven in here. And at a certain point, right, you may want to go, get me the F out of here. Now, this is what's amazing. Just like with dream yoga, because this is part of a nocturnal practice, by the way. Dark retreat is really a fifth nocturnal practice. There's no failure. There's no such thing as a failure in dark retreat. Everything is revelatory. If you relate to your so-called failures properly, they become successes because they reveal dimensions of your experience where you, in fact, may be stuck. So you're in there. You want to get the F away from yourself. Pause for just a second and reflect. This happens, by the way, in just meditation anyway. What are you really trying to get away from? Yourself. Yourself. You're trying to dilute the contents of your experience. And so then what do? In dark retreat, break down, I'm exaggerating, break down the door, run out screaming into the woods. Oh, that was close. I almost died in there. You're trying to distract. There's the bad word here. Pull apart, pull away from yourself. This is exactly, let me say this like 10 times, what's going to happen, according to Tibetan Bardo yoga, when you die. And the luminous Bardo Dharmata is laid bare. That's not me. I'm not nobody, I'm somebody. I'm not nothing, I'm something. You distract, you contract, you pull away, right? That radiance is then perverted into projection in the karmic Bardo becoming. Same thing. Undiluted by experience, it's a nightmare. Got to get away. Can't deal with myself. Distract ye again. Distract, pull apart one more time out of the karmic Bardo becoming into the Bardo of this life, where we then recapitulate, reiterate this pathology of distraction every single time we contract, distract in waking reality. So this phenomenology, lest you think it just takes place on the darker of the Bardos, it's happening now. This is driven by these fundamental primordial contractions. And so parenthetically, by the way, for anybody here who's in a relationship, if you can't stand to be with yourself, how can you possibly expect anybody else to be with you? So give your partners, your spouse, your family a break. This is what makes the darkness so challenging. How big a dose of you can you take? And when you need to dilute it, it's not a defeat. It's like, boy, this is really interesting. You know, I really, on one level, I really can't stand myself. So I move away. I find another place to stand and another place to stand. And I basically then, in my so-called conscious life, again, dictated by these unconscious processes, I literally distract myself unto death when I can no longer distract. And I'm forced to retract. Dr. Treat points all this out. So in connection to this, oh yeah, we've got some time. This is cool. So in connection to this is also really important. You guys still with me? Say yes. Makes me feel better. So let's talk a little bit more about this conscious, unconscious mind thing. This is another thing. Oh man, was this an insight for me? Maybe 12 years ago? I can't remember exactly. So a couple words about this thing, this unconscious mind, since I'm riffing on it. You know, 95%. Just think about this. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. 95% of what we do is dictated by unconscious processes, right? Well, check this out. I believe the unconscious mind is actually a misnomer. It's actually a misnomer. The unconscious mind is only unconscious from the perspective of consciousness. The truer rendering of unconscious mind is it's the obfuscated mind. It's the obscured mind. It's concealed. It's obfuscated. This is a big deal. So we can't do this for purposes of time, but let's do a little thought experiment. Let's take a 10-minute break. Like I'm in Colorado right now. I'm going to step outside. We're all going to thought experiment. You're going to step outside, probably somewhere in the sunny space. I'm seeing a lot of sunny pictures here. It's kind of cool. I want you to step outside and I want you to just look up. Look up. Step outside, you look up. I can see, Pat, and I see these wonderful things. Look up outside. Oh my God, just this beautiful blue sky. Wonderful. Well, what you don't see are what? The tens of thousands, actually the millions of stars that are right now shining. They're shining right now. But you don't see them because they're obfuscated by this mofo solar thing that we call our sun. And so fundamentally what this reveals then is that at the deepest levels, and this is important, at the deepest levels that we're talking about here, light doesn't reveal. light conceals, light obfuscates. And in the following way, if you look symbolically, metaphorically, as the sun, at the sun as a representation of the conscious mind blots out all these stars, all these dimensions of your unconscious mind. They're shining right now, but we don't see them. We don't feel their influence because they're blotted, obfuscated by the light of consciousness and metacognition. You go into the dark, that sun sets. And what happens? All the lights of the unconscious mind start to shine. See? Right? And I will never forget this experience. I was lying on the floor, again, I don't know when, 10 years ago, lying on the floor. And if you've been in the dark, you know, it is so effing dark in there. You can't see shit, right? So I'm lying on the floor, I'm looking up, doing my Shavasana thing, nothing. And all of a sudden it was just the curtain peeled away. And I am not exaggerating. It was as if I was looking at the Milky Way galaxy with all these trillions of stars just revealing themselves. This was a mind-blowing experience. There is no darkness within. There's only light unseen. Remove the light of consciousness, in particular metacognition, exactly what happens when you go into the dark. And what happens? All these lights start to appear. These are the radiant lights of your unconscious mind. And this is where creativity bursts forth. And I mean, all these amazing capacities of the darkness are revealed when the unconscious mind now finally has a chance to shine. And you can now start to relate to this extraordinary dimension of your brain that controls your so-called waking life and bring those lights into conscious awareness. This is no small thing. And so okay, so here we go. So the obfuscated mind, right? The unconscious mind. So let's continue our journey. The mind opens, right? Open. Fall into the bed of spiders and snakes. You continue to open because you understand. You're not going to run away from them. You're going to relax. You're going to befriend them, relate to them. Metta Maitri, dark retreat, is a magnificent practice for metta, loving kindness. You're going to open further. My languaging, I like to play with words. You're going to drop into the bed of sages and saints. And this is, again, another way in Western, or I should say Eastern language, to talk about what happens when the mind falls through these upper bandwidths. Then it falls down into the dimension of the archetypes using depth psychology, the deities using Tibetan language, the gods using theurgic language from the Greeks. Fundamentally, this is where you meet the deities. What's happening here is, whether it's an outer refuse heap of the upper dimensions, of these deeper dimensions, you are going into the dark to die and to meet your maker. This is your maker, right? At the upper levels, your maker are these refused aspects. At the deepest levels, at the level of the archetypes, the deities, and the gods, these are your makers. Samskaras, those of you who know this language. You start to go in there, you discover these are the aspects of my dimension, these deep tectonic plates that make my entire life. And so you continue to drop. Eventually you keep going. For purposes of time, I'm just going to say a couple of things more about this. Fundamentally, like I mentioned, I intimated this before. All the dualities, I'm coming back to something I tagged earlier. All the dualities start to dissolve. You don't know whether it's day or night. Sometimes you don't know whether you're waking or dreaming. Inner and outer breaks down. Eventually, space, this is where it gets really cool. So now we're dropping even below the level of the deities, the archetypes, and the gods. Now we're getting even below that. Space, time, causality, all co-emergent with the sense of self. I mentioned this, I believe, 45 minutes ago. These are all constructs. The things that we take as axiomatic, as given, space, time, causality, self, these are all made up. And when you go into the dark, this demolition derby takes place, you deconstruct, you relax, fall into, and you see how all this stuff is fundamentally made up. Co-emergent with the sense of self is the sense of time, space, causality. All of that disappears because it's fundamentally fake news. So dark retreat, I like to say, erases you to point out the unerasable. there is a dimension of your experience that is pre-temporal, pre-spatial, dharmata, dharmakaya, that is not born, does not age, does not die. This is another magnificent iteration of dark retreat in its relationship to bardo, going all the way down to this reduction base, where you fundamentally, punchline, spoiler alert, you become nothing to become everything. Your entire body, right, flips. Great swap, by the way, if you understand this. Your body disappears to be replaced by the cosmos. So we can talk about, I don't want to get, I have to be a little careful. I get so excited about this stuff. It's like, I want you guys to know everything about what happens within an hour. It ain't going to happen. So I have to curb my enthusiasm here, because it's like, otherwise, I'm on a pulpit saying everybody's got to go into the dark to die. But this is, I think, an overarching, again, orienting generalization that gives you some idea that if you just hang with it, stay in there, understand what's happening, as the mind relaxes, falls into itself, and goes through these sedimentation levels of the unconscious mind, you start to see this first, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy at a first-person level, over and over and over again, going all the way down to the reduction base of the non-dual, and then back up into form. But now when you're coming back up into form, now you're not doing it driven by karmic habitual patterns of ignorance. You're coming up back up now out of love, kindness, and compassion, making your life out of love, kindness, compassion, and service. And if you understand this journey altogether, then you're willing to go through hell to discover heaven, because you realize the inseparability of those once you go all the way down to the reduction base. See? Okay, so let's see, what else did I want to say here? Oh yeah, this is what I did want to say, and then I'll see if you want to take one final dive before we have some conversations, because I want to be also a little careful of roadkill, not to give you too much. But this is what comes to mind along this. This is great for an audience like this. I don't very often, in fact, I'm hardly doing this at all, but I'm starting to, because this stuff is coming up, my book and whatnot. But to spend some time with practitioners like you, some of you I suspect are serious students of the Buddhist tradition, so maybe we can go into these waters for just a second. So indulge me for a little bit here. So at these deeper levels, I think it's helpful to understand that darkness is homologous to emptiness. And emptiness, of course, is a synonym for openness. So as you continue to open, you're going to fall fundamentally into the groundless ground of the reduction base of emptiness. And it is, in fact, from this empty, groundless ground that then you get to see the display, the luminous display of the mind. So I suspect that Alama K and David and Michael probably talked a little bit about the lights that appear and all these sorts of things that appear. If you want to talk about that in the Q&A, very happy to go with this. But the fundamental thing I want to say here is that when you enter this domain of complete openness and emptiness, the domain from which everything is possible, as they say, with emptiness, everything is possible. Then what happens is and this is important to understand about the extraordinary preciousness of the opportunity of what happens when you start to come out of retreat. So again, what I'm saying here is you open to these quite extraordinary degrees. And I have never done this, but boy, someday, I don't know if we could do a study on this, because it would almost be cruel. But I have no doubt after, 7 days, 10 days, I have no doubt that if the walls were blown off and the roof was blown off and I was hit by sunlight and sensory impacts on the phenomenal world, I have no doubt I would go into shock. It would be an incredible, violent contraction against all this sensory input. And the reason I say this is, and I notice this by inference when I come out, especially when I'm in for over a month or so, it takes me days to come out, because I'm so open that I actually have to go super slow. So this is the tip for you when you come out, even if it's just a couple of days. Do so very mindfully, do so very slowly, and pay exquisite attention to what you feel. I notice every time I do this, and I come out at night, I always come out at night, and I can tell because my cook, if I have a cook coming in, they come in for dinner, they deliver one meal a day. I'll come out at night, and even then, the jolt of the jolt of moonlight and starlight is enough to create this kind of whiplash. And so what I do then for the next day or so is I drip my way back out, just like I drip my way in, I drip my way back out. And as I do that, I notice these calluses coming back. I know this armor coming back, these defensive contractions coming back on. And so this is profoundly revelatory because it basically shows me how much of my life is lived in this highly contracted, calloused, insensitive way. In the dark, all these calluses are taken away, at least they are for me. And I come out, I'm so open, I'm so sensitive. And I think I said this in my TED Talk, and it's actually, I'm not exaggerating this. The affective response of this tremendous openness is love. I mean, I'm basically going into the dark to learn how to love. I'm falling into the bedrock of love for me, my languaging, emptiness. It's just a funny Buddhist way to talk about love. Falling into this groundless ground of this matrix of love. And when I come out, I am so open. I almost have to quarantine myself. I'm not exaggerating. It's like I fall in love with everybody. I go to the counter of the store, I was like, I want to say to the person behind the desk, here's my $10, but I also want to let you know I really love you. I haven't quite done that, but I've done it to some friends and it kind of freaks them out, right? I can't help myself. I'm so open. This is, by the way, why Mingyur Rinpoche, if you haven't read his book, In Love with the World, this is why he discovered the nature of the world to be love. Because of his nature, the nature of his near-death experience, he opened to such an extent, he realized the world is made of this love. So this is another really important view, I believe, to understand about what's happening in the dark when you're doing all this kind of heavy lifting, or actually unlifting. You're fundamentally going in there to learn how to love unconditionally. And so when I come out, it's just the most amazing thing. It's painful, actually it's painful, but it's highly revelatory how the calluses come back, how the defenses come back. And part of my practice in post-retreat is maintaining this, right? And so we're going to start studying this. We don't have it yet. There is no doubt in my mind, 100%, just like with psychedelics. Not only are you in a highly neuroplastic state, metaplastic state, you're in a highly hyperplastic state when you come out of the dark. Because reality itself is plastic. It's plastic. So you're in this incredible opportunity because you've died. You've gone into the dark to die. When you come out, bardo will be coming. How are you going to now shape your life in this neuroplastic, metaplastic, hyperplastic way, right? How are you going to now form your life? How are you going to reshape it? And so this is, to me, is one reason I keep going back, to keep opening, reminding myself of the nature of love, and then coming back out, reforming my life more and more by the insights that have been given to me through the medicine. So I did have one last thing to say. Are you still with me? You want to go just one last little step and then we can chat? Okay, so let's see here. What's the best way? This one's kind of cool. One last little kind of a metaphysical dive. To me, again, these are all part of right view, right? Everything, I'm flapping my lips. Lama K's been flapping his lips. David and Michael, everybody's flapping their lips to fundamentally create the right view that empowers this otherwise borderline bizarre practice. Why are you doing this? Why would anybody do this? What's the ROI? So this is kind of what I'm trying to do in an hour I have with you. And last little comment around this, to me is like, whoa, this adds yet another dimension of what the darkness can reveal. It's just, isn't the most amazing thing? You go into the dark to learn how to see. It's the most amazing thing. It's like the ultimate vipassana. It's the ultimate insight meditation. It's just astounding. And all of it, by the way, all of it comes about. I stated this at the outset. All of this comes about, at least in my experience. Yes, you can go in there and do all these tantric things. I am not dismissing that at all. In fact, when I went in, that's kind of the way I was trained to do all the postures and the blah, blah, blah. I'm not dismissing that at all. But what I am recommending for many, many people is the single most important thing you can do in the dark, like I intimated earlier, is shavasana, nothing. Just go in there to die. Non-distracted, non-meditation, anupaya, the path of no. Just go in there, open, and die. And it is through the cessation, there's that term again, whole. It's through the cessation, negation of all these distracting tendencies, right? This applies immediately to what's happening in the meta crisis today. The meta crisis is an iterative expression of meta distraction. It's one dismemberment after the next, one fracturing after the next, one forgetting after the next, one distracting after the next. Distraction upon distraction upon distraction. And so what happens when you go into the dark, because you can't distract, dismember, forget in your normal ways, just like what happens when you fall asleep, it is through the act of the cessation of distraction, of the fracturing, that brings about the healing, you see? This is important. It's like when you break your leg. I'm a skier. I haven't, well, sort of broke a leg one. You go see your orthopedic surgeon. They take the two fractured dimensions, put them in approximation, right? And then what do? They put them in a holding environment, put them in a cast. And so it's through the simple act of the cessation, holding, that the fracture heals, integration takes place, heals. And so this is the genius, just like entering deep dreamless sleep, which, by the way, if you didn't every night, you would die. You don't fall into a non-REM deep dreamless sleep, you are going to die. It is the single most restorative thing you can do. And in a highly analogous fashion, you go into the dark, not to fall asleep, but to wake up, and you do so in a similar analogous way by holding to the present moment, holding to what's happened, to what's happening through the simple act of the cessation, the negation of the distractions and the fracturing, all the healing takes place through simply being. And this is why I think so many terms for awakening are in fact terms of cessation, negation. Nirvana, nirodha, nirguna, nisprapancha, nirvikalpa, non-duality. These are all terms of negation, cessation. Just stop and notice all the healing that takes place. Massively important. So the metaphysical dive, that was just a sidebar interjection. So the metaphysical dive is the following. In many wisdom traditions, light is considered masculine. Darkness is considered feminine. And by the way, you can make light, but you can't make darkness. Darkness is created, so to speak, by the cessation, negation of light. You cannot make darkness. Darkness is elemental, it's primordial. It is the reduction base. You can make light, you can't make the dark. And so therefore, I think this is helpful why people are sometimes magnetized to the dark while also being repulsed because it represents the death space. It also represents the primordial, the original essence of things. So light is masculine and darkness is feminine. When these two are in union, represented by the Yabyum deities, Samantabhadra, Samantabhadri, Vajrayogini, Chakrasambhara, you have the parents of reality. Everybody's happy. The household is in order. But according to a number of traditions, right, this is just my contemporary languaging of this, deadbeat dad, luminosity, uncouples from mom and leaves home, goes into runaway, what Bateson, the great anthropologist, referred to as schismagenesis. When light breaks away from darkness, luminosity breaks away from emptiness, form breaks away from emptiness, this is the birth of samsara. So what we're talking about here, this languaging speaks to you, is really the deepest form of metaphysical light pollution and the birth of patriarchy. One of the biggest problems we have in the world today, maybe you have noticed, is too much patriarchal energy. too much light. In a certain real way, we're blinded by light. And so what dark retreat does in an enantiodromic way, it brings these two fractured dimensions of reality back into harmony with each other. The pendulum swings back to reestablish this fundamental equilibrium, homeostasis, this balance. And so the world that is so wickedly out of balance right now, interestingly enough, I think this is one of the insidious signatures of the Kali Yuga, the Dark Age. We're in the Kali Yuga, the Dark Age. What makes the Dark Age so dark is its insidious manifestation, distraction. And this is all facilitated by light. So the principal signature, talk about an irony, your paradox, the principal signature of the Dark Age is too much light. Too much light pollution at physical and metaphysical levels. Because the light violates the natural curfew of the night, interiority, and invites us, forces us out. So every time we look at our phones, right, the weapons of mass distraction, these lights are constantly pulling us out and away from ourselves. And so the way this relates in deep esoteric form of Tantra, this is one way to look at it, getting a little X-rated here, but I hope it's okay. I've heard a number of scholars say that dark retreat is absolutely positively a form of Tantra. And in Tantra, one of the characteristics of Tantra is the female penetrates the male. It's the other way around. This is also somewhat intimated with practices like Tumo, literally translated as fierce woman. Dark retreat is very much along these same lines. There are several practices in the Tibetan tradition that are in fact prescription strength, that are somewhat challenging, somewhat, just that. Tumo is one, dark retreat is another one. Extremely powerful, forceful methods of practice. And so what I'm getting at here, using the principle of Enantiodromia, is that I now look at dark retreat, and this is just me, and I realize I'm slightly setting myself up for possible attack, which is great. I now look at dark retreat as a type of radical spiritual feminism, as a type of rematriation. We've lost contact with the mothering principle. We've lost contact with origin. We've lost touch with this deeper feminine aspect, this empty aspect of our reality, of our being. We've lost touch. We're lost. We're blinded by the light. The manosphere represents this ridiculous iteration these days of the manosphere. This is just another exaggerated iteration of this runaway patriarchal bullshit. So when you go into the dark by leveraging, the pendulum swings back, you're rematriating, allowing the balancing ingredients of darkness, the feminine, to balance the masculine, bringing things back into harmony. And so using Mahayana language, right? The form emptiness equation, Heart Sutras, is fundamentally out of balance. The level of the Mahayana, luminosity is form. So what? Too much form, not enough emptiness. So when you go into the dark, it helps to melt the emptiness, I should say the form, reestablishing its balancing aspects with the empty nature of things. And so for me, I'll pause here so we can have some conversation. For me, this has been one of the more, I think, compelling metaphysical aspects of what takes place. What does darkness fundamentally represent? What does light fundamentally represent as principles? Understanding this for me, in addition to the psychological risks that I talked about, it's just given me a greater sense of appreciation of this amazing meditation, psychospiritual technology, whatever you want to call it, and a deeper appreciation for the extraordinary opportunity that it now presents in this runaway dark age. Now, perhaps co-emergent with this meta crisis and everything that's happening is the capacity to rebalance, to reintegrate. And we can do this, right? We can microdose in the blink of an eye. We can put our mask on and close. It's so easy to touch into this space. And so perhaps understanding some of what I just shared with you could be of some interest and support for your own journey. So if you want to have some conversation, Q&A around this sort of thing, more than welcome. And that, by the way.
Glenda, do you want to go ahead?
Well, Andrew, without you teaching, I wouldn't have heard about wearing the sleep mask from Timo Speckens. he attended one of your last, I don't know, introduction dark retreat. So I'm just going to condense a couple of things. So this is so powerful, and I agree. This removes all distraction. The first time I put the mask on, I experienced falling back, and my body was falling back. I'm not kidding you. I checked the clock for minutes. It was and when it was falling, I knew it came to me. I'm falling through my lifetimes of all the stuff I've done, and I knew, and I sort of knew stuff would come up, but I didn't really know what. But anyway, then later dreams showed up that showed me my fears, and the images, just like what you're saying, will come up to be looked at and let go of. So I do that. I let go and do. But the most I've worn it is 2 days in a row. But typically I'll wear it all night long or during the day during meditation, where it's resulted in, when I had the mask on, a light showed on the right side, a light showed on the upper left side, and daylight filled my screen, and there was like a car windshield, a clear windshield with water streaming down the windshield with water bubbles. And I'm going, whoa. I thought, well, maybe I've moved the mask to get some light in there, and I was lifting my mask to see him. That's when it left, because I hadn't shifted the mask. It was showing me the luminosity of the pure blackness. So I just want to thank you for your teachings, because it's spreading wide and far.
Glenn, thank you so much. Let me just say one thing. What your languaging here is actually quite compelling to me. You put your mask on, you have the sense of falling back. That's really, I find that very provocative, both in terms, obviously, of this whole notion of Rangbap and self-fall. I think.
Oh, yeah, you said it. I had never heard that word before.
Yeah. It really does have a lot of a kind of explanatory power, right? And so the reason I say this is, you may want to explore this. I mentioned this very briefly, that in my languaging, in my mapping, dark retreat is the fifth of 5 nocturnal meditations. This is just my mapping: liminal dreaming, lucid dreaming, dream yoga, sleep yoga, and then bardo yoga. And so one thing that you may want to play with, if you do explore things like dream yoga and sleep yoga, the following little tip may be of some interest to you, because this could be also helpful when you're in the dark. And I also mention this because one of the magnificent kind of collateral benefits for me of being in the dark is this incredible kind of equilibration of consciousness that takes place when day and night, day is gone, right? So dark retreat literally extends the night. And so you have this unbelievable capacity day after day after day to work with these nocturnal meditations. They really come alive in the dark. And so what I discovered is, try this next time you have a lucid dream, or anybody else that's listening. If you ever want to transition from lucid dreaming to lucid sleep, one thing you can try, because lucid sleep is not easy. Luminosity yoga is not easy because it's so subtle. But one thing you can try is exactly what you just intimated, is the next time you're in a lucid dream, even though you don't have a body in a dream, habit pattern creates it, right? The idea is, next time you have a lucid dream, literally, as literal as dreams can get, fall back. So you just try it. This is so cool. So you're in a dream, you realize, okay, I'm in a lucid dream. What do I want to do tonight? Oh, I want to see if I could taste lucid sleep. What did that goofball say? Oh, he said I should fall back. So literally, close your eyes, hold your breath. Those two things also help, even though you don't have eyes, you can still close your dream eyes. And then the idea is basically just fall back.
No, because I'm separating from the dream of the person, of it. But go ahead. Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. So then again, I don't want to say much. I want you to discover this for yourself.
Yes.
But it'll lend even further credibility to this notion of the mind falling into itself. And also perhaps a connection with this to inner yogic principles as the mind falls from the Sambhoga chakra into the Dharma chakra. So I don't want to side rail this too much, but it's interesting for people who do explore these practices. And especially if you go into, I think this is one of the more compelling things you can do.
Thank you. I took notes. The final point is this morning, this is so marvelous. It's just so marvelous. Is my form lifted? It lifted because awareness was going above my head because I was trying to rest and be with the clear light because I haven't been able to do that during the day, just rest and be with the clear light no matter what, right? So I decided to practice with that mask on. And I felt, because I would take my attention to the primordial ground. I know I've seen it, it's above my head, but I can't stay there. But anyway, awareness, it went to the ground and in a heartbeat. In front of my screen was the vast blackness with the gray specks and the gray swirls, which is the luminous glow.
Cool.
And I was beating with it. And love unfolded just like what you said. This is exactly like what you say, what you teach. Wow. Wow. I'm impressed. Thank you.
It's not just me. I'm just a mouthpiece for the lineage.
Whoa.
But thank you for the kind.
I'll quit oogling. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Anjana, oh my gosh, my dear friend.
Hi, Andrew. So nice to see you. So I'm getting ready for a 3-day with Keen in July. But I want to take advantage. I'm really inspired by today and just this whole class that Lama Karma has put together. And I'm inspired to take advantage of the weekend. Like we have a long weekend coming up, Memorial Day. And I'm wondering, instead of more teachings, I had signed up for Mingyur Rinpoche's teachings. I'm like, I don't need more teachings. I need more practice. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, your talk just was a reminder, like, I don't need to do more learning. I need to just actually practice. So I'm wondering, because I just realized this now, basically I have my apartment for the weekend. What can I do in Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday? I have 5 days in my apartment.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah. So here's what I would do. It's hardest thing to do, right? We're not human doings. So yeah, I mean, this is just a suggestion. Your intuition will guide you. I might recommend kind of alternating between mask on. If I don't know if you can close off, part of your closet or your bathroom or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And basically work with a gray retreat. Work with titrating, dripping in and out of the light and the dark, and then I wasn't kidding when I said I think the single most important thing that many people can do is some version of shavasana, just opening, relaxing, letting go. And so for you do yoga. You've taught yoga with me.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get your yoga mat out, and the easiest pose, which is the most difficult. Just lie down in shavasana. And then, when you have to get up and do something, consider putting your mask on, and then just notice. I would just simply explore, because of course darkness does this, but you can do this under any circumstance. Just how interesting and how challenging it is just to be, just to simply. And so you'll find the dance between those to be, I think, quite revelatory. But outside of that, you have such a skill set. You have all these different practices at your disposal. But I find this highest practices are the simplest, and just resting in meditative equipoise and non-distracted non-meditation. I mean, in many ways, that's what comes to mind.
Yeah. I know that other people with questions, but if you have a chance to answer this, maybe in other, as you integrate, as you answer other people's questions, I'm curious what it was like. I think you recently came out of a 30-day. Is that right? So, and I know you've done several of those before. Just curious what you're noticing in yourself as you're doing more and more of these.
Yeah. Let me go through the questions.
Yeah.
I'm always hesitant to talk about my experiences, my stuff. But if there's time, I can come back. If Daniel
Okay.
reminds me, I can say something a little.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank you so much, Andrew.
You're very welcome, Angela. So
Nice to
super appreciate it. Okay, is it? I can't. Kyle,
Hi.
is that right?
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. I'm from Brazil and amazing call. And so my question is around, I have a flotation tank here. I have a gift to have one. And
Cool.
when you mention, for example, the warm idea, the feminine aspect of darkness, it really is, really resonates with some personal visions for myself inside the tank. But
Okay.
maybe if you can elaborate a little bit about this idea of darkness with water, darkness without gravity, and how this can, I don't know, help or, yeah, I don't know. Because it's really
Yeah.
difficult to practice meditation inside a flow tank. You know, it's a
Right.
different kind of setup. And yeah,
Yeah, I don't have a ton to say here because I've only done flotation tank. I think I only just did it once, but I loved it. Right? I mean, the fact that you have one at home, like, boy, that's awesome, right? So, yeah, what to say? You know, they're as you know, they're just wonderfully delicious experiences, right? Because you're entering about as complete a sensory deprivation situation as you possibly can. And so this is also very, very helpful because obviously when you go into darkness, what you're principally working with is the restraint, curtailment, and then eventually the re-education of the most dominant sense faculty, which is sight. But just as important is the kind of re-education and the restraint of the sense of hearing. And so if you can float in a flotation tank like this, where you have, you know, I don't know if when I did it, I put earplugs in because I didn't want to get water in my ear. And you know, hanging out in this space was really just, it was just absolutely fantastically delicious. It was really the most sensory deprived experience I've ever had in my life, even more than dark retreat. So obviously one issue is you can't stay in there forever as long as you can when in traditional dark practice. But the capacity of just allowing, you know, the Hindus and the Buddhists talk about pratyahara, right? Sense withdrawal. The fifth limb of Ashtanga Yoga and the first limb of the Kalachakra completion stage practices, withdrawing all these senses, like they say, as a turtle withdraws its limbs, you withdraw your senses. And so it's dripping in the water, hanging out in the water like that is just a marvelous way to explore. So what I might recommend, and this is somewhat connected to what Anjana was saying, was just this heightened interoceptive capacity. So this is the geek speak language that we're working with our scientists. That when you're going into the dark, you're fundamentally being invited into the most non-dual sense faculties, which is fundamentally the sense of touch. Getting in touch with who you really are, getting in touch with fundamentally with reality itself. Touch actually as a form of transmission. And so when you're going in, when the senses are retreating, I'm just kind of shooting from the hip here, but pay particular attention to what happens as you notice when the mind withdraws. It's not contracting as it's withdrawing. Just be a really heightened interoceptive. I mean, in geek speak, it's microphenomenologist. Just pay really close attention to what you feel in your interior as your exterior is pulled away. Short of that, I'm hesitate to say more because again, I've only done flotation tank once. I have to say I really loved it. You may want to look at the work of Peter Sedfield. He's done extensive research and studies around flotation tank stuff with his rest technique. That may be worth exploring because the data that they collect there is actually quite supportive and compelling as a preparatory practice to formal dark practice. So you may look at it, it's literally called the rest technique. You may want to look at that and see if some ideas come to mind. Because I haven't done it, I'm a little bit hesitant to say too much about that.
thanks
Yeah,
a lot.
just go in and celebrate, explore. Just be curious.
Yeah,
I think the most
definitely.
important thing really for me, probably the single most important ingredient for success, so to speak, what it means, is just curiosity. Just like, what's it like? You know, what's it going to be like if I do this? And just see what happens. I wish I could be more articulate on that, but that's what comes. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Hi, Andrew. Greetings
Hi.
from Vienna, Austria. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this terrific presentation. As you pointed out, like these dark retreat practices are traditionally part of the nighttime practices, and there's also like the daytime practices, the light practices, and since you so wonderfully explored the the dream yoga and the illusory body practice as the complementary practice of the daytime, I was wondering what is your take on what is the complementary part of the dark retreat practice in terms of daytime light practice?
Yeah, there is one for sure. And again, I don't know if Lama K has talked about it. Togal, right? So the light practices associated with sky gazing.
Yeah.
That in fact, most of the literature is about that.
Sky
That's
gazing.
absolutely positively the daytime correlative practice to this. And so there's two ways to do this, right? One is literally just simple over the counter sky gazing, where you just either look out the window in open space or lay down on the ground and look into open space. That's like the most generic over the counter form of sky gazing. And then outside of that, I can refer you to the literature. Again, I don't know how much of this you guys have talked about, but the actual practice of Togal daytime practices, the postures and whatnot, that's absolutely positively the daytime daytime analog to the nocturnal meditations. But now with that said, right, in addition to that, because you kind of suggested this yourself, is exploring nocturnal meditations of liminal dreaming, lucid dreaming, and dream yoga. This is another really compelling way to mix post-meditation, post-dark retreat with life, a way to enter a miniature dark retreat every night when you fall asleep, because the same types of phenomenological processes are really taking place. The mind is falling into itself. And so this is like I mentioned earlier, when you're in the dark, you see this over and over and over as you're sleeping all the time. And it's just day and night and everything breaks down. And so the capacity to work with the mind in this liminal space where you don't know sometimes if you're waking, dreaming, or even dead. And so in addition to the kind of daytime Togal practices, which again, I'm not sure how much you guys have covered, I would recommend liminal dreaming, lucid dreaming, dream yoga. Because these are wonderful preparatory practices, and they're also, in my opinion, wonderful stabilizing practices when you come out. Because just like with any experience, just like even with a psychedelic experience, integration is key. Integration is everything, because you can have an amazing state experience, but we want to transform state into trait, nyam into kokpa, right? Experience into realization. And so doing that during the day, the dripping, the mixing during the day is fine. So the last one would be, and I mentioned this somewhat tongue in cheek, but I'm actually somewhat serious about it, is microdosing the dark every time you blink your eyes. Just literally, you can kind of touch in to the quality of this practice with any of these approaches. So that's what comes to mind, my friend, something like that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the dark retreat in a way is like, I mean, maybe the word sutric is not the right one, but it's like it's a kind of restricting. So you are creating kind of an artificial container in a way, and then
For sure.
then the opposite of that would be like completely opening.
Yes, exactly. And again, this. I've actually said this. I might have intimated it. This is actually, I think, quite important, right? Dark retreat isn't the point. Togal isn't the point. These meditations aren't the point. Life is. And so for me, it's always like how, and this is what I tried to suggest with these practices, how can I use the dark retreat to help me with my life? Because if it's just a super esoteric, artificial, in the sense of contrived, specialized, you got to go, it's just like so prepared. It's like, this is about the most removed thing from my life as I can possibly do. Well, for me, taking the fundamental insights that darkness can bring out and extending them to, so to speak, outsight, how does this relate to my life? That to me is a really important part. Extraordinary capacity to work with metta on some fundamental level is just tremendous kindness to whatever arises in your experience. understanding that whatever manifests, again, is a luminous display of your mind. When you're in the dark, that display is just heightened because distractions are taken away. So for me, this is where I come to all these things, like, these techniques, these technologies, they're amazing. But it's not about the techniques. It's about living. It's about life. So for me, this is what I call translational spirituality. How does this translate into my life? So I think this is really important, because otherwise, even then, practice itself can become a trap. This is a subtle form of spiritual bypass. You can still, you can get lost even in practices themselves. So this is just me. This is just kind of my rant. Like, what do I really get out of the dark? Well, all the stuff I was trying to share with you, a deeper understanding of my mind, the projective power of my mind, all these things that I tried to point out. So that when I come out, I go, oh my gosh, so this is how this applies every single day, every single moment. These principles are being iterated. I think I did say this. Dark retreat for me is just life concentrate. It's just a really concentrated way to work with life, because you can't dilute it anymore. So take those insights from that life concentrate, and then express it in your daily activity. And I think this kind of translational spirituality then becomes an invitation for all of us to actually discover what that means for us. That to me is the point. That's the point.
Okay.
Thanks, my
Thank
friend. Oh yeah, Daniel, another friend. I have at least 2 friends in this group. Hey, buddy.
Hey there. Thanks so much. I probably have about 1,000 questions, but I'll keep it to kind of 2 related ones. In the tricycle talks, you mentioned kind of the home-based, then doing a retreat, and then having a teacher. And so one thing I'm curious about is, how to find that teacher, especially for me personally, as someone who borrows and learns a great deal from Buddhists, but I'm not a practicing Buddhist. It seems like where to go for that. And somewhat related to that is this kind of post-retreat integration. It's been almost 3 weeks for me, and I still have this tremendous tenderness, to the point where just during this talk, almost tearing up several times, right? And it's in some ways I want to hold on to it, but in other ways, carrying around this tenderness while walking around the DC area is not easy. And so in some ways I wonder, could a teacher help with that in a post-integration thing? So, especially in a higher dosage type of, where my dosage of my retreat went up, that integration becomes, in some ways for me, it's definitely been a little more challenging. So I'm curious about that post-integration and the teacher idea. And then if you can talk a little bit about your experience, I will remind that, because Jenna did ask.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing, Daniel. That's really sweet. And you mentioned something quite important here. Just a slight sidebar, but absolutely ties into what you said. You want to let the darkness defeat you, right? This wonderful quote, again, the female penetrates the male, right? So Rilke said it so beautifully. I love this poem. Winning does not tempt that man, for this is how he grows, by being defeated decisively by constantly greater beings. This is just so magnificent. And so what is fundamentally defeating you from a Buddhist point of view here is Prajnaparamita, the embodiment of emptiness. She's defeating you. And so if you let that, enlightenment is not victory. Enlightenment is defeat. Enlightenment is defeat of egoic structure. And so I love what you said, because a real near enemy of this practice, especially for a lot of guys, women, our studies have shown women tend to do better with this practice. This is so interesting for lots of reasons that I could talk about. Men, and I'm not saying this is you, because the fact that you're so open and tender indicates that it's not you. But I'm saying this because a lot of people that do go in with a kind of conquering machismo, click it off the resume. The next, I literally read this article in Outside Magazine. I'm not exaggerating. This guy had conquered K2, the second largest peak in the world. And in this text, it said, well, that didn't compare to his conquest of 7 days in the dark. Are you effing kidding me? And so the reason I say that is, if you go into the dark and you white knuckle it and you tough it out, you'll come across the finish line somewhat bruised and broken, and it's only your ego that's going to be stronger. This practice is not about becoming a tough guy. It's becoming a softie. And so when you come out and you say you're tenderized and you're soft, I bow to you, because you've gone into solution, so to speak. And so this is the kind of post-retreat practice, is how do we maintain keeping our hearts, minds. Again, it's not just your heart. Meditation, habituation. Your mind opens.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Randy, if you can mute yourself, Randy. Your body opens. Everything opens. That's what creates the love. That's what creates the tenderness. And so the only thing I can say, not the only thing, the one thing that comes to mind, first of all, is just being aware of that. You're still in this beautiful metaplastic, hyperplastic space. Your comments suggest that. And so then just, continue to be aware of that. You're still somewhat in an incubator phase. And so protect that, hold your experience, as Trungpa Rinpoche said, in the cradle of loving kindness. Hold yourself with tremendous metta kindness, because you're in this really tender open space. And then notice, somewhat akin to the earlier question, notice how the calluses, especially in DC, oh my God, I mean, I can hardly imagine, right? Like the archetype of contraction, short of Las Vegas. Just notice the armoring, and notice the contractions, and you'll start to realize, oh my gosh, my life is riddled by these contractions. And so, yeah, it just continued tremendous kindness, Maitri, and also just delight in the extraordinary space that you're in, celebrating the space that you're in, and just being intensely curious. Your languaging is already indicative that you're really curious about what's happening, you're sharing. So that's one thing. Now, the teacher thing, yeah, there aren't that many, especially if you're not so-called card-carrying books, right? You talk to most teachers about this, and I'm sure Lama K can say something similar. A lot of teachers will say, even though they know it, they'll go, I don't know anything about dark retreat. Because this is traditionally a pretty secretive practice for a number of reasons. And so a lot of teachers, they may know a lot about it, but they're not going to tell you. They go, I don't know anything about dark retreat. No, with that said, Lama K is a terrific guide. Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, if you have any connection to this amazing teacher, he's one of the very few people that writes and teaches and he's got a 5-year program to deliver people into the dark. And we're in conversation all the time. He is now, in fact, his people, Marcia and Ale, are now guiding people on 3-4 day retreats, which they'd never done before. So he's just terrific. And I know you, I can put you in touch directly with Ale or Marcy. These are the people that are now kind of doing this kind of thing, because he gets it, obviously, that the dark retreat now is coming out. And in order to bring it to scale safely, he's really working, I believe, in extraordinarily skillful ways to kind of make it available to the public. So I can put you in contact with them. Yeah, and then, honestly, where's the ultimate teacher, right? The ultimate guru? Within, right? That's within you. And so learning to, trust that voice, trust what you feel, trust. This is the most amazing thing about the dark. It's just like with a good psychedelic experience, right? You want to have a really good psychedelic experience? What do the guys really tell you before you go into a psychedelic? Trust and surrender. You want to have a good trip in the dark? Trust and surrender. And that means trusting goodness, the structure of your own being, so that you're willing to open and surrender to it. And so even in post-meditation, trust your intuition, trust your heart, trust the ultimate guru within you. Yes, external gurus, for sure, amazingly helpful, absolutely positive. But all the other forms of teacher, guru, they're all pointing to the ultimate. So with that said, Tenzin Wangyal is the guy. Ale, Marcy, I can put you in touch with them if you're interested. And then, yeah, just see what arises from it. Okay, my friend? Cool. Oh, good. I've got 1 minute to spare. Hey, I wanted to thank everybody. I'm a little reticent to talk about what happens for me in the dark. I can just say very briefly, I keep going in there because the unconscious mind is infinitely vast and deep. To become familiar with this vast array of my unconscious mind, let alone the contents of the super unconscious mind, so to speak, the clear light mind, this takes rinse and repeat, again and again and again, increased familiarity. But I do have to say, every time it gets easier, it gets more enjoyable, more celebratory. What I used to approach with some trepidation, now I approach with total anticipation and delight. And so that's my riff on the third deity thing. But I wanted to send deepest gratitude to everybody who's putting this program together, and mostly to all of you for taking time out of your busy lives to hang with us for a couple hours or so. Delight. So thanks, everybody. I'm not sure if...
Thank you, Andrew. That was wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Best Dharma talk I've heard in a long time. Thanks.
Appreciate it.
All righty. Thanks, everyone, for coming. And I'll post the video in the next couple days and send around an email. So thanks very much. Take care. Have a great weekend.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Enjoy. Bye-bye.